And in last few years, to be precise, last more than 20 years, speculative design became very much in fashion. There is more and more designers which are embraced speculative and related design approaches in their everyday practice. There are more and more studies or design studios producing visions of the future technological scenario. There are more and more companies where more and more companies were employing designers to imagine future trends. This is like Google Design. There is a kind of small group in Google Design Force which is dealing with speculative design as a tool in their everyday practice. There were more and more mainstream conferences and exhibitions dedicated to the futures and related to speculative design. We are talking about conferences and exhibition which were and which are still open for the broad and mainstream audience, not just for the art expert designers and so on and so on. And we were witnessing an increasing number of educational programs based on the speculative practice as a kind of tool for changing the future. And for potential students, they became kind of hype or cool places for studying. However, and luckily, speculative design were confronted with a strong criticism during this last 20 years, so to be precise, last maybe 10 years, that is separated from the real world. So basically, working in the galleries, some research laboratories and academic context, that is coming from the privileged Western position. Most of the projects are practiced by the people coming from the West, mostly white males were like project coordinators or running the project, and that it looks salvation in the dystopia scenarios, not dealing with the present, with the current situation, current problems, but thinking about like thinking about like catastrophic scenarios as a possible starting points for the building a new society or better society. And of course, science fiction has always been a great inspiration within design practice, not design, but also architectural practice, and of course, any kind of practice which is dealing with the creativity, because it has this long history of creating imaginary scenarios, world and characters. And however, these visions of the future also served as a tool in the hands of the big corporations in realization of their preferable futures, which are usually built around corporate or corporation technologies. One of the best known examples is this. This is 1939 New York World Exhibition, and the biggest pavilion was this one, designed by the American industrial design legend Norman Bell Getz and General Motors, and the name of this pavilion was Futurama. And this idea of this pavilion was representing the vision of America City of the future in 1960. So looking in 30 or 35 years of the future, in 30 years in the future. And of course, as we see here, it was kind of accurate forecasting of the future, but the future was not designed to suit the humans, but to suit cars and highways, which was, of course, like the main product of General Motors as a company. And this kind of corporative fetishization of technology dictate the role of technology in society. This is a similar example, IBM presentation at the World Fair in 1964 in New York again, designed by another industrial design legends, Charles and Alexandra Ems, which was focused on artificial intelligence, which at that time was technology mostly developed during the Cold War time, And via this warfare, the technology or IBM was seeking for its new market position and its new life. And similar rhetoric is nowadays used by many big corporations, mostly in the IT world, and keywords such as safety, optimization, efficiency, speed, and similar are used in all corporate visions of the future, built around their new technology. This is Microsoft, I think, 2016 or something vision of the future. But we can see that this vision of future are entirely dehumanized. Mostly people are props for the technology, not people using technology, but mostly technology using the people in these scenarios. And of course, technology is always working perfect. There is no bugs, there is no any kind of glitches and so on and so on. But luckily, if we look more in the pop culture, future scenarios presented in the film and TV production include criticism and offers much more fun. This is something from my generation. It's a cult TV series, The Twilight Zone, which was mostly popular in the 60s and 70s, which stands as one of the most significant mainstream examples of the speculation about possible future, dealing lots of also with the technology, but also all these cultural and political context. And of course, today we are witnessing a growing production of dystopian stories in the mainstream Western context, and this is the most famous one. It's a follow-up or follower of the Twilight Zone for the 21st century, and it was apparent that dystopians were back in the fashion, and dystopian literature were also on the rise. In this diagram, we can see that recently its dystopian literature reached the level of its golden era. Golden era was a Cold War time in the 50s and 60s. Of course, there is no doubt about this historical importance of dystopian fiction. We use dystopian fictions, or they are serving as a defense mechanism and assistance in recognizing this dark world in the future. But we should not forget that we already live in such scenarios. For example, Neuralink from Elon Musk's company, or Metaverse, where is Black Mirror's references are obvious here. But if you look out of our Western context, especially in the global South, lots of people live in such scenarios for many years. But we don't need to go like far away. If we look also around us, people living in edges of so-called developed world in Europe, also living in a kind of very dystopian scenarios. And this popularity of dystopian future scenarios also implied a certain dangers, that it could let people understand catastrophic scenarios as unavoidable, which makes us passive instead of proactive. So like we see all around like this dystopian catastrophic apocalyptic scenario, and we slowly became passive. And as we can see in this our diagram, these dystopian scenarios of the future have a direct impact on the present, creating a kind of temporal loop and stopping any possible radical improvement. So we are living in the present when all the future scenarios are quite dystopian. For us, it's impossible to imagine any kind of future which is kind of optimistic or bright, since everything around us or future around us, it's dystopian and apocalyptic and dark. And such, we can say or call it like Netflixization of the future. It's of course the result of the dystopian media production, but also demand of us from the consumers. It created the future that is again linear and predictable, and we don't have like any more such a nice cone or such a nice possibility for positive or multiplicity of the future. And we can say that it's important to start thinking again about different, again, non-linear future and not centralized future. This dystopian thinking requires some counterbalance or positive visions of the future. And all this in this, like this part of the lecture was basically before the pandemic and before the war in Ukraine. And in that context, which was like basically first decade of the 2060s, of this century, we started to building our approach at our university, at our department. And in that context, we named this approach speculative Mediterranean approach, which was practiced far away from the European urban and technological centers on the so-called the edges of the Europe. And our focus on the speculative practice, or our practice in design, was on implication of important global topics in the local context, of how emerging technological, economical, social, and political changes will impact the context of Mediterranean southeast of Europe. And this approach resulted in a series of works titled Mediterranean Speculative Trilogy. They are kind of works which with aim to first start discussion, think about possible futures, but also trying to offer some possible scenarios for the building resiliency in the future. And I will show you first one of our first projects from 2014, which is classical speculative design project. And the theme of the project was a smart city, because at that time we were like part of the big European FP7 before Horizon project dealing with the smart city, which was kind of buzzword, was kind of really like one of these like hype technology at that time. And in our near future story, it's a fictional story, and it's based on our tradition in Mediterranean tradition of city-states. And our city, Eutropia, it's a city, which economical and political status are based on the trade of the citizen private informations. So this kind of new fictional information-based economy gives independence and welfare to all the citizens. And the scenario, its question is, what about privacy in this welfare city of the future? And city developed a state-of-the-art infrastructure for collecting this data, and citizens voluntarily cooperate to assure the constant flow of information. I will show you just like few minutes of this video which is presenting this project. Okay, so what we have here, we have like a scenario possible future dealing with what could be one of the outcomes of the smart city. The smart city is not just the intelligent technology which is optimizing our like everyday life, that it could maybe end up in a different direction. And what about like individuality? What about privacy in this like possible future world? So we designed kind of objects you have seen here. We were thinking about possible technology which could be possible to be implemented in such a scenario, and we produced not just a video, but it was exhibition, and with all these objects we use in this video, and we're generating quite intensive discussion about like possible outcomes of the smart cities. And the second project I'm showing today, it's a project from 2070s, which was focused on automatization of the work and labor in the local context. Here we are dealing with automation of the cruising sailboats. Everyone was talking about like automation of the cars, but for us in the local context was something else was interested, and so we were speculating how it will change related occupations. So we went at Split Harbor Master Office, and we collected data that the skipper who is operating on the touristic sailing boats were one of the most growing occupation, and becoming one of the most popular occupation. And we were speculating what it could be in the future if the all sailing boats would be automated in automatization, so which could be run by the computers. So this project brings this near future story about the last skipper, the guy who refused to leave his boat, or to give like a machine to operate his boat. And it's a story about this once romantic and one of the most popular occupation, which in near future come to extinction by the automated sailing boat systems. It was also produced as a kind of installation, but I will show you just a little bit part of the video.
Bude interesantni ljudi. Mislim, to je kao posao interesantan.
Umjesto ti putuješ po svijetu i upoznaš ljudi, ljudi dolaze se upoznavati s tebom i još dobiješ neku.
I to je vrlo interesantno. Ovo zadnje.
Pa već danas postoji intencija da posada na pogotovo velikim trgovačkim brodovima zapravo samo nadgleda rad elektronike, praktički elektronika upravlja brodom veći dio plovidbe od isplovljavanja do uplovljavanja u luku.
Osnovno moje mišljenje je da skipera ne može niko zamijeniti. Nijedan stroj, nijedan tehničko dostignuće. Neko tu uvijek mora biti prisutan.
Pa za očekivati da bi eventualni ljudi na brodu samo mogli uživati u plovidbi, dok bi cijeli posao za njih obavila elektronika.
Meni to nije to. Ja mislim da to nije to.
Ne, toliko daleko ne možemo razmišljati. Mislim, skipper vjerojatno neće umriti. On će mora biti na brodu. On će mora biti, šta ja znam, na letilici. Danas, sutra, šta ja znam, neko će mora s tim. Ljudski faktor neće biti isključen u nijekom slučaju.
Računalo se ne umara, računalo u proračunu ne griješi i računalo uvijek igra na sigurno. Čovjek je sklon i umaranju, ali čovjek je sklon i riskiranju, što računalo nikad neće biti. Kada bi računalo bilo dovoljno sigurno, da se u nijednom trenutku neće doći do nekog poremećaja u radu računala, onda bi vjerojatno bilo sigurnije od ljudske posade i za očekivati je da na neke duge pruge da će računalo moći sigurnije upravljati brodom od čovjeka.
A mislim, osim toga, skiper, uz to što je skiper, ako ima malo afiniteta za neke druge stvari, kad je s gostima tipa skočiti umore, izvaditi hobotnicu i takve neke stvari,
Viškoljke.
to je već to, niti jedan stroj neće moći napraviti.
Evo se i Toma proda automatizirala se i Filomena. A šta ti fali ovako? Bolje ti je s menom, nije ti dosadno. Ja ne dam ja tebe nikome. A ko zna ili radi ova kamera? Viće me kapetanija gleda, evo ako me gleda, evo da vidimo da radi, evo, izgleda da radi. Evo moramo voditi dnevnik, pratiti sve živo i zapisivati u dnevnik, jer to radi kapetanije moramo sve, jer me oni gledaju, moramo to paziti, sve da bude tip top. Di su sad svi oni moji skiperi? Stoje u kancelarijama, uredima, glume menadžere, bukiraju, ukrcavaju putnike, gledaju im sigurnost, a makinje nam voze brode. Tili su snimi moj glas, ali nisam ja tija. Stroj može imati sva znanja, ali nema dušu kao i ja.
Okay, so what we had here, we have like this contrast between like a present, these two skippers and the scientists talking about like possible outcomes of the automatizations of the sailing boats, and then we have like this fictional future story about this like guy who refused to automatize, to refuse automatization of his sailing boat. And this project was a part of the Vienna Biennale and a part of exhibition titled "How We Will Work in the Future," and we presented as a kind of anthropological archive with kind of video documentaries and artifacts from the past, from the occupation from the past, and we had all this like originals photo from the skippers with their crew and the model of the ship, how it looked like before this new generation of automatization of the boats. And here the first project was just like our vision of the smart city of the future, but this time we include different stakeholders in design process, scientists, skippers, and people from the city harbor office. And this project raised intensive discussion both with the public and experts. There were lots of like writings about this project, not in the academic or art design based magazines, but you know, in some kind of mainstream publishing production. For us, this was really important because like scientists and skippers, we were working with them in this project. Like for them was the first possibility or first occasion to think about these possible futures. The third project is from 2018, and it was focused on the climate changes on the Adriatic Sea, and it was caused by this situation that in 2080 Adriatic achieved the highest sea temperature ever. 30 degrees was the highest sea temperature measured ever on the Adriatic Sea. And the project intended to provide a possible alternative scenarios to expected climate futures. To offer alternative scenarios and to prepare us for the possible post-apocalyptic Mediterranean. But also we want to offer a concrete tools, techniques, and mechanisms which could help individuals and communities in rebuilding their lives after disaster, and to provide a kind of new hope in the new beginning. And this fictional near future story, this time is situated in 2055, the second half of the 21st century, when global climate changes resulted in extreme changes of life and economic conditions in the eastern part of the Adriatic. And Split, our city, it's a historical city. Just briefly about the city, which used to be a very important industrial center in the second part of the 20th century, mostly known for its large shipyard. But through the transition at the end of the last and the first quarter of this century, became a city with economy entirely relied on the tourism. So it's a kind of, when we do speculative projects, we think about like present and trying to anticipate the future, starting from the present, which is happening now. So it's very important to understand the present and to connect the present with the future. And we are talking about like near future, not some kind of far distant science fiction future, but something which could be really possible looking at the present today. And in our scenario, slowly with climate changes, with climate disaster, tourism as the most important economic sector disappeared completely. Migration has started with the collapse of tourism, and a number of citizens fled toward the inland and the northern parts of the Europe. And those who stayed tried to use sea level rising and the penetration of the seawater inside the historical city core, also the rising temperature of the sea and the intensive salinization of the seawater as opportunity for the future, as a kind of new hope. And in this scenario, historical city centers are becoming places for the new forms of food production. The Central Asian Square in Split becomes one of the city pools for the new mariculture, for extremely resistant sea organisms, unicellular algae, branch shrimps, which is kind of really like small shrimps, and sea anemones. And this surrounding buildings are used for production, drying, preserving, packaging, and preparation for distribution, and citizens are organized in the small cooperatives in Split in 2055. So at the beginning, we started the investigation in the local context. In the speculative practice, it's always important, this collaboration with the experts. And this time we collaborated with the Institute of Sea Studies and Fishery, and we worked together on these background scenarios, and we carried the research together to find these resistant organisms to work on set up installation with algae, shrimps, and anemones, which forms elements of this food chain, a cycle. So on the left, you can see algae, which kind of this green stuff in the seawater. In the middle, these small shrimps, which are really small one, and on the right, we see sea anemones, which is kind of the most important part of this maricultural installation or food chain. So we cultivated algae using the minerals and light, which served as a food for the branch shrimps, and which we use later as a food for anemones. Of course, everything in collaboration with the experts from the institute. And after 1 month, we achieved growth of all species. So installation was working, and we transferred all in the gallery space, and we invite the chefs from the local cooks association as the partners, and they prepared and demonstrated the new food potential of the mariculture of the near future. So they cooked at the exhibition opening sea anemone risotto, which was possible for all the visitors to try. And during the exhibition, we also called the experts from the institute, and we organized an educational workshop for the students and the high school pupils about this practical aspect of cultivation of marine organisms for the food and other production. And we also had a workshop with the small kids, elementary school, about life after disaster in our town. So they designed a different possible solution for the sea sea rising in our city. These are like houses with the legs and stuff like this. And after 1 month grow in the gallery, we got like new anemones and lots of like new living beings, and this all the newborn anemones which didn't end up in the risotto has been returned back in the sea at the same spot we collected them at the beginning. And I will show a little bit this video, which is covering the whole process, but I will show just a few minutes.
Makroalgi, onih morska trava koje viđamo, sve su to alge. Heterogene su u smislu načina života, znači od autotrofnih do
da, samo što ona imate možda genka diploid, možda i više kaženka, ne samo tetraploid i ono drugačije ide razvoj. Mali račici, njihova kapsula se obogaćava metalom imaju posebne firme šta rade i kako bi oni što prije dekapsulirali, da ne čekaju po nekih 16 sati do 20 do dekapsulacije.
And we also, as a kind of outcome, it was just, this project was not just like raising awareness, discussing, but we wanted to offer something like more concrete. So we published this do-it-yourself guide for building mariculture. So it's print and online, so everyone could, using our this like manual, could construct the exactly the same maricultural setup. And our focus was always, since we have academic institution, how to transfer our project into education. And from 2004, we are running a series of multidisciplinary international workshops, inviting students from not only from design, but from architecture, IT, social science, and so on and so on, dealing with contemporary design practices, always trying to act within the local context, which is for us is very important. And in this context, we started to discuss or primarily focusing our activities on educational context in order to critically reflect educational practice in these areas and in area of design and the field of design generally. Since there is a quote from my colleague James Auger, who is now teaching in Paris, since there's still a lot of mainstream design and design education, it's stuck in the last century modernistic notion of design, or it's connected with the design, so-called common design means that design is good, design improves people's lives, and design solves problems, which is, of course, sometimes true, but unfortunately, we see always around us that it's most of the times it's really not true, that design sometimes it's really not good, and then sometimes doesn't solve people problems, but brings even more problems, and even like makes people lives harder. And for us as educators, this task we want to achieve is quite hard. We want to move students from the problem solving and this market perspectives of design. Then we want to bring them these critical tools and methods. At the end, of course, as outcome, we want to generate a new concrete outcome, so kind of visible social actions or something similar. And in 2018, we started European project Speculative Edu, with the intention to look into speculative and also related design or design education in general, by collecting, exchanging, and extending existing knowledge and experience with 6 partners. And in almost 2.5 years, we were mapping speculative design landscape in order to bring an overview of the contemporary speculative practice. We conducted more than 50 interviews with a number of practitioners and educators from this field. And we got also additional open call for the case studies. Everything is still documented in this website, where you can find everything you need about speculative and related design practice, or design practice today. We also hosted some educational activities. This one was in Rome, very interesting, in summer school in 2019, with the topic in neo-rural futures. Everyone was dealing with urban future, but our focus was on the rural future. And this event was really interesting and with really important outcomes. And through all these activities, we have opened a series of new questions about our practice, about the role of design, about relations